less than a decade, a gun runner's wet dream.
After the decade!
And nothing more!
We lost decades of research and development today.
We choose to go to the moon in this
I've come here every day now for 2 decades.
For decades, I was Dennis Hopper's right-hand man.
The blood in his veins dried up decades ago.
In the decades since the Zodiac's last cipher was released.
See, sheep swore off romance decades.
America, enjoying a decade of unequaled prosperity, has gone wild.
11 major conflicts involving 32 countries in less than a decade, a gun runner's wet dream. At the time, the West couldn't care less. They had a white...
If you see a bearish future in the decade ahead, consider the changes sweeping the world and...
Don't hold with equality in all things, only with equality
After
before
the
the law,
decade!
and nothing more.
Fervent advocacy.
He's answered your questions. This amendment's not to...
Actually, that's why I'm here. We lost decades of research and development today. Right now, Will, your lab is the only one that...
Choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. Not because...
Remarkable. Child's play. I've come here every day now for 2 decades, painfully picking up a few of the least difficult fragments.
I'm Satya Delamontatu. For decades, I was Dennis Hopper's right-hand man, a.k.a. El Hombre Indivisible.
The blood in his veins dried up decades ago. Only dust
In the decades since the Zodiac's last cipher was received, every federal agency has taken a crack at the...
Saying just because you like Emma, don't bother. You see, she swore off romance decades ago when she got her heart broken. And she's never...
You know how many people went to see Magic performed live in the last half decade? About 1.6 million. You know how many DVDs I sold?
The year is 1928. America, enjoying a decade of unequaled prosperity, has gone wild. The Jazz Age, it is called. The rhythm...
I've been in a car. 2 decades spent behind 3 inches of bulletproof glass due to a natural fear of high-powered rifles and quiet.
But you're Alan Quatermain. Stories of your exploits have thrilled English boys for decades.
That I know. And Nigel has done a great...
After more than a decade, the infamous tornado has finally been unmasked, thanks to the work of the International Dream Team. There's...
Death with Reginald Kincaid was a towering work, decades ahead of its time.
Lesson number 2, advanced Boeing.
Our no-show guest, Mr. Pickleton, a man who I have waited over a decade to ask straight up why in God's name he was...
Languages of my time here and started Chinese lessons recently. I butchered them for decades in Chinatown, never understanding a damn word they said. I thought I ought to...
Oh, it's completely socked in. Yeah. Biggest snowfall in a decade or so. Yeah, nobody's getting through that.
Lotto days. What others might earn in a decade, he can conjure up in an afternoon. His Swiss scam was such a stroke, a child of his...
It is. Is it all that serious, Felix? The Huns have been a nuisance for decades. They've crossed into our territory. They're isolated raids.
Don't worry about that as a fool. Of course we do. Brian Mackey did a high atmosphere analysis of the last 4 decades. Brian?
Last year,
We'll never had. 2 decades of agony taught me the error of my ways. But you, Doctor,
those words.
It's the last piece of the puzzle physicists have been looking for decades.
Thank you for your attention. Thanks to everybody on the panel.
Soviet Union. Much more than just a game for Brazil, and with all their losses in the last decade, the country's spirit has been just crushed. We've even...
I had to rely on my experience of managing the altitude and speed of thousands of flights over 4 decades.
You're saying you didn't do any...
I eyeballed it.
Pretty sure? We've been prepping for you to arrive for over a decade. That too.
So you said it just fine.
When did coffee go to $2?
A decade ago.
God forbid you get extra foam on the top, you have to make payments.
And new rights to be won. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing. not because...
These are the vibrations I've been concentrating on.
Are you ready, Sandra?
I'm Joe Stromble, reporter, and I have the scoop of the decade about the tarot card murder case.
And he is ahead of his time by God knows how many decades.
Or that the illness itself had returned, or that the patients were unable to cope with losing decades of their lives. But the reality is, we don't know what went.
I found this intel on Mazarov. It's been retrofitted several times over the last decade by the Central Regime. It's got weapons researchers.
Hundreds of moons. Each one terraformed, a process taking decades to support human life, to be new Earths.
Creates trends. You understand? Artists like Steve come along once every decade. I'm talking Giorgio Armani, Gianni Versace, Coco.
And credited blacklisted writers. This is a clear repudiation of the decade-long fight by anti-communism to punish
£4 billion sterling in untraceable currency that will allow the syndicate to operate undetected for decades. Instructions to access these funds.
For decades, the Federation thought that he was a hero. I guess time will judge us all.
I know I haven't been at my best this past decade.
That's true.
Go ahead. Didn't NASA predict we'll find evidence life exists beyond Earth within the next decade? After you've been in this field a while, you learn to take those predictions with a grain.
Beginning to end. Decades from now. People will...
Electric tension here at Fuji. 80,000 bedraggled race fans and the racing grudge match of the decade. And there's Mario Andretti in pole position.
First financial crisis in modern times. Certainly the largest financial disaster in decades in this country, and perhaps the end of an era in American...
Family. My child and I have not had any contact for several decades. My colleagues, as you have discovered, are not exactly...
I was actually having the first good idea I've had for a decade when you rang on the doorbell. But now it's gone.
I'm on a neighborhood watch list because I have to register as a predator. I haven't had a date in almost a decade because if a girl Googles me...
Okay. So, you're back, decade late, and you're on some sort of therapeutic assignment, and you want to...
higher dimension that we can't consciously perceive. I'm drawn across the universe to someone I haven't seen in a decade, who I know is probably dead.
Know it, but the beloved electrolytes were salts that had been building up in the topsoil over the decades, killing plants and leading to the Dust Bowl.
Will you guys relax? We are on the threshold of establishing the indispensable defense science of the next decade. Professional, paranormal investigations and...
I thought that it meant that you would marry me. But then a couple of decades went by and Universe showed up.
Well, you all moved 3,000 miles away, you know.
Some jackwagon egged our house.
It has been decades since these island people have seen a free and fair election.
Oh, no, I didn't get excited till I saw the cooling.
Screw, please.
Here? Now? Just kidding. I know it's been decades.
You'd be surprised.
Pretty grossed out.
Have we met before?
I don't think so.
No. There was a lost decade, so I always have to check.
How's your mum?
She's fine.
I am curious. Where are you going?
Giving up tenure.
A decade of professorship. In line to chair the department.
Hippie wigs in Woolworths, man. The greatest decade in the history of mankind is over. And that's presuming Ed here has...
I'm Special Agent in charge, Ernest Paxton.
In charge of what? Fucking me over for another 3 decades?
I don't know anything about your previous matters. I'm here because of...
What was something this stupid in Nigeria? This man has been a public servant for decades.
That's what's supposed to be the best part of you. And it's caused me 2 decades of agony, Steve, that it is for you. The worst.
From my boyhood dream. I have served my country for decades of unparalleled prosperity, and you are my golden parachute.
Bumpy Johnson, age 62 when he passed, was a folk hero among Harlem locals for over 4 decades. Regarded by some as the Robin Hood of Harlem.
Just for you? What you saw was a commercial that was recorded decades ago. It was an invitation that never went out because the damn... On the left!
I have been picturing this moment every day for the last 3 decades.
Arrest the staff, arrest all.
You can't be serious.
Yes, I most certainly am.
No one has traveled with the Jews in decades.
So it's about time.
Defecting?
We're not sure, sir.
He has taken refuge in the Ketha province, a region uninhabited for
He's got to be
decades.
hiding there, sir. He knows if we even go near Klingon...
In what sense?
Well, you're not coming back. Your father moved out decades ago. Philip's not going to marry Hilda. Nobody's going to marry Mary.